What are some of the best ways to prep for your sermons to give you and your team plenty of margin going into the weekend? What are some ways that you can prepare your sermons with efficiency? That's what we're going to be talking about today.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Before we jump in, I want to make you aware again of some of the conferences that we're going to be at this fall. This week in Orlando, our team will be at Experience Conference. This is a worship leader conference we would love to see you at. If your team is planning on being there, be sure to find our booth there at Experience Conference. We would love to see you. We'll be in Nashville for Kids Matter MegaCon, October 4th through 6th. This is a huge kids ministry conference for your kids, pastors, and leaders. Also, CFX in Dallas, October 24th through 26th. We're going to have a big podcast set up there where you can watch our show live and see all the interviews of all the speakers. We're going to be interviewing everybody there. We'll have a big podcast set up that you can see all those interviews happen live, and those interviews will air later in the fall and in the spring. So if you are there at that event, it'll be a really cool opportunity for you. Then later on in the year, SALT 22 in Nashville. My friend Luke McElroy and the team at SALT, all friends of mine, do an amazing job putting that conference on. We'll have another podcast set up there, up in the mezzanine level. It'll be looking down on all the lobby of all the activity happening down there. So as you look up, you'll see us there on the mezzanine level. We'll have a big podcast set up where all the speakers of that event will come over as well. So you can see all that happening live there at SALT. So if you are there, we would love to see you and say hey. Also, we will be at CPC, that's Children's Pastors Conference, in January in Orlando. We'll be back at Disney's Coronado Springs. This is a kids ministry event. We serve a lot of people in the kids ministry space. Awana and Answers in Genesis, Seeds Family Worship, Go Curriculum, and lots of others with custom media content. It's really humbling that our team is trusted with graphics and videos and little animated videos and lesson story videos, Bible story videos to go along with huge VBS, huge midweek and Sunday curriculum. We make a lot of that stuff that your kids see in Awana, your kids see in an Answers in Genesis Vacation Bible School, with Go Curriculum, with the worship with Seeds Family Worship. We're kind of the behind the scenes folks that make all of that stuff, and it's really humbling. Our team does a great job of making that content. Well, lots of activity this fall and into next year. We love seeing you guys in person. So if you're at any one of these events, we would love for you to come by and say hello. We would love to learn who you are and see and hear what God is doing in your church and through your community. Well, today on the show, I welcome my friend Trevor Miller. Trevor is the family pastor at Mount Horeb UMC in Lexington, South Carolina. He also writes a lot of our scripts at 1230 Media, so for videos and mini movies and custom media projects like sermon bumpers and things like that. He also writes sermon content for Outreach, which we partner with, and things like that. And so he does a lot of work for 1230. And today I'll be talking with Trevor about sermon prep ideas. Again, he's a full-time pastor at one of the largest Methodist churches in the country and has some great tips for pastors on prepping your sermon for the weekend. Well, my conversation with Trevor is coming right up.
Hey guys, Grant here from the 1230 Media team. I want to let you know about our blog at 1230.media. We have over 600 articles on the site, categorized by your ministry area, meaning you can jump to articles on church media or production, worship, communications, service planning, and more. Free training to help you make Sunday happen. Start learning today. It's all at 1230.media/blog. That's 1230.media/blog.
Hey guys, today I welcome my buddy Trevor Miller. Trevor and I have been friends for a long time. He's been on the 1230 media team since nearly the beginning of our company, and he is the family pastor at Mount Horeb United Methodist Church, one of the largest and most respected churches in Lexington, South Carolina, where we both live. Trev, what's going on, man?
I'm doing good, man. Looking forward to being with you.
So before we jump in, give me an update on Mount Horeb and what you're seeing at churches, pastors that you are dealing with. You get out and about a lot with conferences and other things. Kind of give me a temperature check.
Yeah, so I would say kind of post-COVID now, our church in particular is starting to kind of grow again. So I would say we're still 75% of pre-COVID kind of worship on the weekend. But everything for us has kind of opened back up, whether it's student ministry, kids ministry, small groups, everything within our church is kind of working full-fledged again. So, we did a really good job, I feel like, as a church of moving digital very quickly once COVID hit, and then making the transition back into kind of in-person worship took place pretty quickly as well and safely. And so, we're excited to see this next season. School's starting up here really soon, and we're excited to see kind of what's going to happen when families come back into worship full-time again.
Yeah, so you're full-time family pastor at Mount Horeb, and then you work with us at 1230. Yeah. And people should know, I think, I know I had you on the podcast, like episode maybe like 9 or 10. I mean, probably. Like way back. And we've been together a long time doing the 1230 thing. And
that was from my production director days at the church. Not my finest days, but that's how I met you and got connected to you. And it's been a really good run. It's been a lot of fun working with you.
Yeah. So I think I just came and visited one morning and was like, hey, let me meet, where's the production guy? And they introduced me to you. And I was like, this guy.
And I thought too, I was like, oh, great. This guy's going to be an awesome volunteer. He's going to totally nail it. Turns out we got lunch, created a fast friendship, I think. And then I think have created some really cool stuff over the years. So. Yeah.
So just so people know, you write all of our scripts for not only a lot of the mini movies and the boxes. You write sermons for partnerships that we do at Outreach. You help us create content. You are just pivotal in the 1230 game, and man, I appreciate it.
It's an honor.
All right, so let's dive into some sermon prep stuff. So I wanted to talk about, sermon prep and how we can plan better, how we can, that sort of thing. So give me an overview of your experience being a communicator. You're on the teaching team. You're on the rotation at Mount Horeb, preaching. Yeah. You preach in other venues on the road and things like that. So walk us through some of your experience for people who don't know.
Well, really kind of my experience with communication goes all the way back to kindergarten. My mom and dad still have letters that came home from my kindergarten teacher saying, Trevor's a great student, but he talks too much. And so I've seen God kind of take that aspect of who I am and allow it to be kind of a gift that he has used now. And so my communication really began in student ministry. So I'm a graduate from a school called Columbia International University. And so right away, I went into student ministry, both middle school and high school ministry, and was communicating there each and every week. I was a worship leader at the time too, but sensed over the years when I first started that God was leading me out of kind of worship leading and more into communicating, teaching, and preaching. And so it wasn't really until I went to a different church for a season that they gave me the chance to be on stage for the first time, which is always dangerous when you give the main stage to the youth pastor. But it was really well received. And I felt like God was really saying, this is kind of what I've built you for. This is what I've made you for. So really since then, my role within the preaching and communication team at Mount Horeb has continued to grow. So I preach probably 25 times a year, but I'm a part of a whole team of people that put together our sermon and sermon planning for the year, each and every week in and week out. We have a team that meet together. And so myself and our worship director for the whole church, we come up with all of the series content and kind of help give direction to the church in terms of what we're going to communicate, how we're going to communicate it. And so, I've been speaking at camps and different kind of conferences and things around too, but it's my joy, it's my passion. But I also feel like it's a piece of the church that we could do better. And certainly we could, I think, put in some real processes that would help us as pastors be the best communicators possible.
So when we look at prepping for sermons and when specifically we talk about planning our year, where do we start? Get us some first steps.
So there's a couple places I would probably begin. The first place would be really looking at who's on your team. So I want to be very clear. Not every church, and I understand this, has a team of people that work at it. There are many churches, right, smaller churches that have, a lone pastor who's doing the whole thing, who's preaching on Sunday and taking the trash out on Monday, doing everything in between. So, but I would say that no matter who you are, no matter what kind of church you serve in, you can still put together a team of people that help you do this. And the reason I would say that's an important first step is because sermon prep to me is participatory in nature. Meaning, I think from the very beginning, really the early church has always wrestled with the scriptures in community with one another, not just some lone pastor sitting in his office all by himself thinking, hey, what do I need to say to my congregation this Sunday? And having to do it every single week. So instead, I would say, if you're a single pastor at a church somewhere, find people that you can put on your team to help you do sermon prep. Like, who needs to be on the team? Maybe it's your organist. Maybe it's your youth pastor, your children's pastor. Maybe it's a group of laity, 4 or 5 people from your church that you trust and you respect in your community that could come and help give voice into what you're communicating. But if you are on a church or in a church with other people on staff as well, like our church, we have about 8 people on our sermon prep team, which include all of our pastors on staff, as well as our worship leaders, both for our traditional service and our contemporary service. Our communications guy is in that meeting as well for any kind of information in terms of like announcements or whatever else we talk about. And then along with a couple other individuals we feel like are important to have on the team too. And so that's our team that meets together each and every week. And so the first thing I would say is, who needs to be on the team before you really start looking at how do you implement some kind of sermon prep process. Good. So invite them on the team and then create a structure for that. So kind of big picture, I would just say, like, as a pastor and someone who serves in a church, if you plan to fail, or if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. So if you're looking at your kind of year-long process for sermon planning, there's a couple of things that are really important to think about. The first one would be, what is your church calendar? So Carl, you and I have talked about this a lot, depending on what denomination you're in, maybe you're more connected to kind of church calendar in terms of kind of big moments within the calendar year, whether it's Advent or it's, Lent or Easter or, some other kind of major movement within the church calendar. But if you want to be attuned to those things, those have to come into play at the very beginning so you can place those into your plan. But then secondly, there are also seasonal markers that happen throughout the year too. So, some big ones like Easter and Christmas, those would be important to have on your church calendar in terms of your planning. But there might be other things as well. How are we going to handle things like Memorial Day or 4th of July? Or how are we going to handle things like Thanksgiving, different kinds of holidays? Do we want to speak to those on a Sunday morning when we're preaching, when those kinds of things come about throughout the year? So who's on your team, I think, is first and foremost, like, make sure you have a team that you really trust, that you can really share with and allow to speak into kind of your communication. And then secondly, really look at your overall planning, like what is ahead of you, both seasonal markers, church calendar. And then lastly, once you do those things, I think it's really important to put together some kind of exhaustive document to be able to have all these things put down so that everybody on the team has access to them. So there's multiple ways to do this. I know every church probably does it a little bit different. We have a Google Doc that we share at our church for the staff that I work with that has all kinds of information in there that's really, really important. Things like the dates that are coming up, the seasonal markers we want to pay attention to, the series title, weekly titles, scriptures, write-ups, special notes of any kind, who's the communicator for different weeks. We put all of that into our Google Doc that we can share together. But there's other ways too. I mean, what are some ways that you kind of keep information together? Evernote, maybe one of them you could share between people. Maybe it's actually a written document that you're just going to keep to yourself and you're going to write those things down. It could be an Excel spreadsheet, whatever it is. An exhaustive document where you can put all that information in is going to be a really great place to start.
Good. Let me take you back and let me ask you from a biblical perspective, What are some teaching approaches that Jesus used?
Okay. So, coming from a Bible college, this is like something that's talked about often. At our church, we teach through what we consider to be a series-based teaching approach. And so typically we're going to be doing 4 to, at the most, 8-week series all throughout the year. That's our approach. Some people hate the sermon series approach. They think it's too topical. But I would argue if you look at what Jesus did within the scriptures, he actually taught all of the different ways that people seem to choose to be their favorite. So, for instance, I think Jesus did do series-based teaching. In fact, in the Gospels, there's many different places where Jesus has kind of a sermon that he gives on multiple different aspects of one particular theme. For instance, the kingdom of God. He talks about the kingdom of God in multiple different ways. I guess he's series-based preaching. His series is called The Kingdom of God. And then he gives you different variations of what that means in a kind of a series format. But he also teaches topically too. So Jesus is focused on his congregation, the people he's teaching, whether it's out in the fields or in town or someplace else. Whenever he's teaching to them, oftentimes, like in Matthew 5, actually, he does this where he is teaching what I would consider to be, topical based teaching. He teaches on murder. He teaches on divorce, on truth telling, on love, on prayer, and other different topical things as well. And so he sees them important to his congregation. And so he speaks to them and kind of teaches and preaches about them. So he series-based preaches, he topical-based preaches, and also he seasonal-based preaches, I think, too. So in John 13, at the very end of Jesus' life, he's having a time with his disciples, and it's during a time called Passover, which is a very important festival within Jewish culture. And so what Jesus does then is he begins to teach about his broken body and his shed blood, which the reason he's teaching about that at that point in time is because Passover was related to the sacrifice that took place while the Israelites were in Egypt, right? So the blood of the sacrifice, the broken lamb, the shed blood. So Jesus is taking this seasonal aspect and he's teaching them this really important truth based upon that. So in my denomination, many pastors actually preach what's called the lectionary, which essentially is going to kind of follow the church calendar, which again, I think is something Jesus did. So all that to say, I don't think there's necessarily one form of preaching or teaching. There are many churches that preach verse by verse, chapter by chapter through an entire book. I think, essentially what we're doing is we're taking Paul's topical preaching and then we're using it to do verse by verse, chapter by chapter teaching. And so all of those ways I think are absolutely appropriate. I think the bigger question I have is, are we being true to the text that we're using when we're communicating, whether it's series-based, topical-based, or seasonal-based?
Good. All right, let's talk about planning some. You mentioned that phrase, failing to plan is planning to fail, which I think is accurate. So, and I don't want to pick on pastors here of, if they do their sermon create their sermon on Saturday night. Sure. Kind of thing. But I do want to talk about planning and how we could be strategic in that. So what could we accomplish if we were planned out more, if we were planned out further?
Well, so to speak to that kind of scenario, I mean, certainly there have been times where I'm up at midnight, 1 a.m, looking over my sermon on a Saturday night, Sunday morning, before I go in there to the congregation and deliver it. But I would argue the same Holy Spirit works at midnight on a Saturday night that works 2 weeks before the sermon takes place as well. And so I just think that we can tap into that kind of spirit to be able to guide us and direct us in what we're going to be communicating far before it's the night before, the day before. And so all this comes back to, in my opinion, just really good organization to be able to determine how we preach and communicate when the time comes. And so on our team, there are quarterly, 4 times a year, where we come together and do what's called long range planning. So again, if you're a single pastor on your own, you have a group of team that you've put around you, whatever it might be, 4 times a year, you could step back for a few hours on one particular day and say, where do we want to go over the next 3 months? Like, what do we want to accomplish over the next 3 months of preaching and teaching on Sunday morning? Like, that would be the place to start. And then after those 3 months, consider doing it again. So 4 times a year, long range. But then on our team, what we do is every week that we meet on Tuesdays. The pastor who's preaching that coming Sunday is essentially delivering their pretty accurate to what it will be on Sunday outline and concept. We're doing final tuning on Tuesday before Sunday, but then we're also talking about the next week out too. So the pastor who's preaching the following Sunday, we're looking at their notes and again, fine tuning, wrestling with the text. Is this really what God is saying here? Wrestling with the felt need of the people in the congregation. Is this really what needs to be said? And helping each other, because for us on the team, when one pastor wins in terms of preaching and teaching, we all win. Like it's a team effort. So I would really recommend for anybody, whoever they are, to do quarterly or long range planning, looking out 3 months ahead, and then consider saying, hey, I want to be 2 weeks out. I want to be, week of pretty much done with kind of where I'm going, what that sermon's going to look like. And then my notes or basic outline for the week following that I'm wrestling with. Because here's the thing, there are so many times, Carl, I think you've said this too. I go to a movie and I hear something, or I see an article in the newspaper, or I see something on social media. Somebody says something to me. I have a funny moment. And I think to myself, man, that fits perfect in this sermon that I'm doing in 2 weeks. If I've not thought about that, then I've robbed myself of having that bucket to put it in when that comes up. And so I would argue 2 weeks out and then quarterly do long range planning.
How does that help? And I can speak to this too if we need, but how does that help the creative team? So you're 2 weeks out, or you've done long range planning, you've done 3-month planning, you've done 2-week planning. How does that help? Whether it be video, pro presenter, worship team, how does it help those creative teams?
So again, let's just say you're pastor all by yourself. Then you are the creative team also. So you're actually helping yourself out by doing this long range planning, because if you want to have any kind of creative element in your service, let's just say it's as simple as an illustration. Like, I want to have a beach ball in my hand on stage for this particular topic that I'm talking about. Well, that takes creativity and it takes planning. And the further out you can be, the more you can think about those options. And then to your point, also, if you're on a team that has someone running pro presenter, has a sound guy, has a whole worship team, has a whole creative team behind them, pulling off a Sunday morning, then of course, to be able to give them where you're headed for 2 weeks out or the Tuesday before Sunday, that helps them out tremendously to be able to prepare for Sunday so that all things are put together and put together well. So for us, like many churches, we use Planning Center for all of our preparations for Sunday. And so it's very helpful on Tuesday if I can wrestle with my team on what I'm going to be preaching that following Sunday. And then for our church, every Thursday at noon, the notes are due from the pastor to those who are putting into pro presenter. So I'm never late. That's not true. No, sometimes I'm a little bit late. But even if I'm getting it to them at 1:00 on Thursday, if my goal is noon, but I'm fine tuning, getting it to them at 1:00 on Thursday, it is far before they have to have it before the weekend begins. I don't want my team scrambling on a Sunday morning, having to put everything in for me because I've not done the work ahead of time to be able to prepare well. So I would just say putting those markers in place for yourself, due dates for yourself, whether you are the creative team or you have a creative team, it's going to set them up for success as well. And it's going to be a more seamless experience on Sunday morning for people, because I'm not into performance. That's not what we're trying to accomplish. But what I am into is non-distraction. And so the more planned ahead on Sunday morning we can be, then the more opportunity we have for our worship experience to have no distractions from people to be able to fully experience it.
Okay, so shameless plug commercial here.
Yeah.
If I am a pastor by myself, which this will apply to every team, no matter your how many team members you have. But let's just say pastor by yourself in this scenario. What we do at 12:30, taking your creating your graphics, creating your sermon bumper, creating any graphic or video need that you have. Do a shameless plug here on how that would be a huge help to a pastor in long-term planning.
Yeah. So let's take the first scenario. You're a single pastor. You are the creative guy then as well. There are products that we've created called Series in a Box that has literally all of your graphics, all of your video, all of your social media, all of it in one place. And so all you have to do is download that one particular series that you like because of the graphic, because of the topic, because of how it fits with your congregation. And you have 4 weeks potentially or more right there in your hands to be able to execute. All you have to worry about then is writing your sermon, because everything else has been provided for you to put into ProPresenter or whatever other kind of a presentation software that you're using. And so it's incredibly helpful. And let alone that, you also have the social media aspect, so you can do the promotion for the Sunday for people to come and join you. It just allows you to do things that you would love to do, but oftentimes don't have time to do because you're focused on all of it together.
Yeah, or the money to purchase the team to create it yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're spending thousands of dollars on a video guy and a graphics person and whatever else from a production standpoint, you literally can get all the same items that those people would provide for you at a fraction of the cost by being able to purchase these series in a box or do some kind of custom work with 1230.
Right. So, and we do both ready-made and custom. So, but a great church planner, single pastor guy, the ready-made stuff is right there for you. Yeah. Let me, and we'll camp here for just a second, then we'll move on. But, let's take the series in a box, for example. Yeah. What if the pushback to that is, well, it's not the series that it's not named the same, or it's not quite dialed in. Tell me about that. How have you crafted?
So two ways I would handle this. One, there are I don't know, Carl, 70 plus different series in a box that we have right now. So let's just say you start looking at the first page and like, none of those really hit me. There are many to go to, let alone the fact that 1230 can take whatever product we've already created and can adjust those things based upon kind of the parent product that we've created. And so if someone sees a series in a box they like, but they'd like that title tweaked a little bit or something changed a little bit, then they can reach out to 1230 and have those things changed for them to fit their particular scenario or congregation. So
yeah, good.
But if nothing else, it's a stepping stone, a bit of a foot up for them maybe to get started.
Right. Okay. Commercial over.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the benefits of a teaching team. Meaning, if I'm a sole pastor at a church, I might be expected to preach either, maybe not all 52, but certainly close to that.
Yeah.
So and you can speak to a single pastor if that's the scenario, or I'm just after, what is the benefits for you of having multiple people that you're not expected to preach every single Sunday? It's a team effort. What are the benefits of that?
Yeah, so on our team, there are probably 5 different individuals who rotate through in terms of preaching. On the weekend, we have 2 services, a traditional and a contemporary service that are very distinct from one another. But they happen at the same times, 9 and 10:45, which means we have 2 pastors on a weekend who are preaching. So what that typically means is as we're preparing during the week, myself and another pastor are preaching the same topic, same passage, usually same passage, but we're delivering it to our own specific environment. So I might be in contemporary and somebody else is in traditional. Well, we're going to use different illustrations. We're going to use different kind of stories based upon the room that we're in. But to be able to collaborate on that is incredibly helpful. I can't tell you how many times someone on the team has come and said, hey, I found this story that I read years ago. I think it really fits what you're trying to communicate on Sunday. I'm like, oh, that is perfect. It's exactly what I needed to close my message or to illustrate this particular point. And so multiple brains on it is just going to help simply by bringing more information into the scenario as you wrestle with stuff.
So what if I'm not in 2 different venues?
Yeah.
Like I think a lot of churches are moving to this approach where even if there's a senior pastor in place or, there's a move right now that there's not a senior pastor, Jesus is my senior pastor kind of thing,
right.
But a teaching team.
Yeah.
And so even if there's a senior pastor in place that the pulpit is shared.
Yeah.
What are the benefits of those scenarios as well?
Yeah. So I've been in the church for a long time. I've served full-time in the church for about 16, 17 years. And there have been many churches that I know who have had, a church split take place because of some kind of personality. Let's say there's this one pastor and there's this other pastor who begins to rise up and all of a sudden goes off and plants another church and there's a split that takes place. That can be a really, really painful thing for a church. And so what we've experienced at the church that I serve in is to have multiple voices preaching on a Sunday morning does multiple things. One, it takes us away from that personality-driven church. So our church is not just based upon one particular individual. And if that individual goes and does something else, the church crumbles or it falls apart or it splits in half. So instead, we have multiple voices speaking on multiple different weekends. And people, it's going to be normal for people to really, adhere to one pastor versus another one. But we try to keep ourselves from having a personality-driven, experience within our church. But not only that, but if there are 52 weeks a year that we're preaching, and for us, there's 2 services on every single weekend, that's 104 speaking opportunities. That's something that one single pastor just simply can't do. And for a single pastor who is preaching 52 times a year, every single week, Sunday always comes, that is an incredibly draining thing. And let alone the fact that doing hospital visits, they're, doing weddings and funerals and all these other kinds of things. So to have a team of people that you trust to be able to communicate alongside of you is a huge, huge win. One of the things I love about my pastor is he has not been intimidated by bringing other voices onto his team and voices who are very good communicators. That's a really hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of guts and a lot of humility to allow that to happen. But he knows it's made him better, and it's made us better because we've pushed one another to raise our level of communication. And so having a team is good like that, I think. One
thing I like too is Jeff, for instance, the senior pastor at Mount Horeb, is in the room.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? This is not, gosh, our pastor's always out of town putting a guest speaker in the pulpit. This is a different scenario.
The team.
This is empowering the team. I like that.
And I like it too, because like you said, he is in the room. I want to make sure that when I'm preaching on a Sunday, I'm communicating and saying things in such a way that my senior pastor would say, yes, that's the vision and the mission of our church. That's in line with that. Or to be able to say, hey, I think you might be missing it here a little bit. That's humility on my part, then, to be able to take that feedback and to be able to implement that into my message.
Yeah, good. All right. So you mentioned a planning spreadsheet, an exhaustive document, and this might not be on that sheet, but just let me walk through a couple of things. What are like dates, seasonal markers, series titles? What are some things that you put on that planning sheet? Yeah.
So we have very specific things that are on that sheet. And I would say they're very important because of their sequence also. So for instance, our first one is dates. We want to put all of our dates down. Hey, here's when this Sunday is, this Sunday is, this Sunday is, this Sunday is. We're going to put them all down on the calendar. That's going to help us in multiple ways. It's going to make sure that we're aware of where those dates fall in line with seasonal markers or holidays and what's close to Thanksgiving, what's close to Christmas, those kinds of things. Then also it allows us to make sure that our pastors on our team are not out of town on vacation, but we're making sure that we're following all the dates correctly for the Sundays that are to come. So dates. Secondly, seasonal markers. We want to mark those down as soon as we can in its own kind of row, so we can follow through on that. Holidays as well, the seasonal markers. Then we have our series title. So I'd like to walk through here in a minute kind of our process in terms of long range planning. But once we have done the long range planning, then we have our series title, and we can put that into that document on the date that it's going to begin. And then we can also then carry it out for the 4 weeks or 5 weeks or whatever that it's going to carry on throughout the whole series. Then we're going to have our weekly titles. So each one of those series are broken down into weekly titles then. Let's just say our overall series is called Swim Lessons. So we've got a 4-week series called Swim Lessons. And each one of the weeks is broken down into, let's say, everybody out of the pool, or, floaties, or, 4 different weeks that kind of break down that particular series. We're going to have all that written down for us. So again, we're aware of it. We know what we're talking about. We know what it looks like in Planning Center. Then we're going to also have our scriptures. And so again, in the long range wrestling that we're going to do together, we may have the scriptures that we're going to be using specifically for those weeks of that series. We're going to put that into the document as well, so we're aware of that. All the communicators know kind of what's being said. That way too, if we have 2 communicators, somebody's not using the same scripture on week 1 that they're using on week 4. So we're going to coordinate that a bit. Scriptures and then write-ups. This is something that I'm not sure a lot of pastors put a lot of energy into, but I would just say it is incredibly important. A write-up is just really simply a paragraph, 3 or 4 sentences that describes a week of your series. Here's what we need to say. And if we don't say this, then we've not accomplished the mission for this particular week of communication. So the write-up helps everybody. If somebody's going to be posting on social media, they can use the write-up. If it's going to go into a newsletter, they can come from the write-up. If it's going to be a part of a bumper video, it can come from the write-up. It's going to guide everything. And it takes time, and it's hard to wrestle with, but it is so valuable and very worth it in the end. So we'll have a write-up for every week of our series, including the series overall. So
let me pause you here and say that for churches that use us for custom media, like to create their bumper, that's all we ask for. Is the title of the series and the write-up. And honestly, we write the script from that. We create everything from that. So I know that sometimes pastors get intimidated by I don't know how to keep up with everything. What you just said is all you need for an outsource agency to do custom media.
And let's just say too, you've planned a series out, and so you've got all the details for that series, but you get to the series and it's like, oh my gosh, what were we talking about again? Like, what was the goal here?
Right.
You've got that, chronicled in those write-ups, so you can literally jump back in and be like, oh, that's what we're trying to say. Not only that, but I'm very big on language. And so if we're in a sermon series that, again, is swim lessons, I want as much language in there that has to do with pools, with water, with whatever. Like, I want that language to show up in the write-up because it grabs people and it connects to people and imagery and those kinds of things. So if you've done your write-up, then another big step, and it's very important, we answer 3 questions for every week. By the end of the sermon, what do we want people to think, feel, and do? Like, by the end of this sermon, what do we want people to be thinking in their heads? Where do we want to take them in terms intellectually? But secondly, what do we want them to feel emotionally? How do we want them to feel at the end of this message? Hopeful? Do we want them to feel urgent? What kind of emotion do we want? And then lastly, what do we want them to do? I would argue that anytime we preach, we're not preaching for information, we're preaching for transformation. So application has to be a really thought out process. Are people going to come forward? Are they going to raise hands? Are they going to sign some kind of something? Are they going to think in their minds about something that they want to change specifically? Like, give them something to do. And then lastly, we put our speakers in there. Who's speaking each and every week? We put those names in there so we can follow along and make sure that we're not overloading one pastor over another. And then lastly, special notes. So let's just say as we're talking through, there's a song that comes to mind. It's like, oh my gosh, that song will be so perfect for week 4. We're going to put that in the special notes. Or, hey, it's like, hey, if we're going to be preaching on, milk and honey. So it would be cool if we had little straws of honey that every person in the congregation could have and taste during the sermon. Let's put that in our special notes so we can order that and get that in and have it in place. And so special notes just help guide us for anything else that's going on. You may put also announcements for that particular week in your special notes so you don't miss, an announcement about Boy Scouts or an announcement about some kind of fundraiser or something like that. Those can go in the special notes too.
Good. How do you handle felt needs of your congregation? And do the series change? Like if you have some big community thing happen or something, how quickly can you change course based on the felt need?
Absolutely. So there's 2 major questions we have to answer as we wrestle with sermon prep. The first one is, what is the felt need of our congregation? So what that means is, what pain points do we know exist within our congregation? So as a pastor who's been here for 17 years, I know my congregation and my community pretty well. And so I know there are certain things that our community wrestles with and struggles with. Those are what we consider to be felt needs. And if that's a felt need, we want to speak to that. Again, this is something that Jesus does all the time, all throughout the Gospels. He's almost always speaking to some kind of felt need within the people that he's speaking to. But here's a key here. Sometimes the felt need is not necessarily known by the congregation. They couldn't necessarily voice it to you. And so part of our job then as a pastor to be prophetic is to help give language or voice to that felt need that maybe is being overlooked or not acknowledged necessarily within the community. So felt need is incredibly important because felt need then is going to drive what series we're going to create and how we're going to create it. But the second question that comes off of felt need then is, what's the felt need we want to speak to, but also how do we make it relevant? Mm-hmm. We're going to communicate this particular topic or idea or theme or passage or scripture. Then how do we make it relevant? How do we make it something that people can grab hold of or relate to in some kind of way? How does it play out in our community? Because it probably plays out different based upon the community, place in the world, denomination, background, all those kinds of things. So how do we make it relevant to our people? Those are 2 questions that have to be asked and answered.
So let's get into how you plan your sermon. So when you're doing sermon prep, the first thing that I have down in your notes is that you're an investigator, that you go after and kind of search through if it's a topic or whatever. Get me going there. Yeah.
So the first piece of our process is going to be an investigator. So it's going to be really wrestling with the community that you exist within, the church that you serve, what's going on within there. So maybe within that community, there is, let's say, an area outside our community that's got a lot of poverty that could be taken care of, that could be eradicated if our church were to be mobilized in some kind of way. Well, that's a felt need in our community that we can speak to in terms of preaching and then equip people to actually take part in. But it's going to take investigation. If you're not invested in your community, if you're not invested in your congregation, if you don't have conversation, you don't go to lunches, you don't have a pulse of your people, then you're going to have a really hard time knowing what to preach and how to communicate it. So what Paul was such a genius about in the New Testament, Paul was so connected to his churches. And so when he writes these letters, essentially what he's doing is he's writing sermons that are addressing particular topics that were going on in those congregations. So some of them are kind of shocking, some of the things that were going on, but some of them are just things that we still wrestle with today that are just like what's taking place in 2022. And so I think investigation is going to be your first step to be able to have a really good sermon series that's effective for people.
What else? What are your other 2?
So what I would suggest then is once you do that investigation piece, then you actually launch into kind of your process of quarterly planning. So I'm going to walk you through kind of like what one of our quarterly plans look like that we're going to do a 3-month planning process on. So the first step is going to sound like Pastor Trevor's, first step, but it's because it's absolutely true. And it's going to be prayer. Like we're going to take time to pray and ask God to guide us and direct us and speak to us about what our people need to know and hear. And so as a group, when we come together, the first thing we do is we ask God to guide us and to speak to our hearts as we wrestle with this stuff. We want to pray and have God lead us in this whole thing. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to really take the pulse and talk about current felt needs. We're going to narrow them down. So we do it in a very specific way, but you can do it in multiple ways. What I will often do with our team is I will say to the team, all right, everybody, I've given you all Post-it notes, colored Post-it notes. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to take about 10 minutes and write down as many felt needs that you see exist within our congregation. So it could be anything from, suicide. Maybe there's a suicide that's taking place in the community and it's really heavy right now. When that's a felt need, we're going to write that down. Maybe it's marriages. Our marriages are really struggling. Maybe it's poverty, some kind of situation in our community that we can take care of and we can address. Maybe it's, affluence. People are so affluent, they don't have a desire for God. So whatever the felt need is, everybody on the team is going to write those down. And typically I'll have a place on a wall or something that everyone sticks those Post-it notes onto for 10 minutes. So by the end, I may have a whole wall full of felt needs. Now, we can't do every series for every one of those. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take those felt needs and then begin to narrow them down. And so typically I'll have little sticky stickers, different colored stickers that I'll give everybody. And say, okay, now what I want you to do is I want you to pick 6. You could pick whatever number you want. Maybe if you want to do 8 series this year, you can pick 8 of them. And they're going to take those stickers and place them on whatever felt needs they feel like are the most important, most pertinent that need to be spoken to. That way, through that process, as a group together, you're discerning by God's help, what are the most important things for us to address and talk to and speak to within our congregation. So you may go from 40 Post-it notes on the wall to all of a sudden 8 that have the most stickers on them that are going to be the series that you're going to wrestle with and deal with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, another way we can do this too is if your church has very clear missions, a mission or very clear values, let's say there's 6 values your church has, then you might just say, okay, of the felt needs that we have here, which ones really fit into our core values or our mission statement as a church? And we're going to kind of have each one fit into that to be able to reinforce our mission or values within the church. So you can do it in multiple different ways. The biggest picture of this first step then is just to wrestle with what does our church need to hear and then narrow it down to the things that you're actually going to speak to. Okay.
Gotcha.
So, let me keep going.
Right. Yeah. Keep going.
All right. So step 2, the next question you're going to ask as a team is, what does the Bible say about these things? So let's just say you have now 8 different topics that need to be spoken to. And we've named some, suicide, marriage, affluence, apathy, whatever it might be. What does the Bible say about these things now? And so again, I'm going to probably have some kind of process of collecting this. So I keep Post-it note in business. And so, maybe we have Post-it notes again, and people then are taking time to think of either narratives within the Bible, specific scriptures within the Bible, themes within the Bible that speak to these different areas that we want to communicate to. So they're going to write all those things down. And so then again, the process will continue. They'll take those ideas they come up with from the scriptures, whether it's themes or narratives or passages that are specific, and they're going to place them next to the different things that we're going to speak to these next 8 series. So we'll collect all that then. That's going to be the next piece of elimination. Okay, what passage do we think then speaks best to this? What is the best passage for us to use to communicate this particular topic or this particular area? So you're going to narrow it down once again to use those scriptures. Now, again, you may have the overarching idea for a series, but you may actually keep all 4 of the scriptures that people threw up there because you want a 4-week series for that. So we actually have our 4 weeks from God's word right there that we're going to use then to break down as we communicate this topic to our congregation over the next 4 weeks. But the next step is a very simple one. It's a simple question. What are we going to call it? So if we have kind of our topic that we're going to tackle, we've got some scriptures and what the Bible says about that topic. What are we going to call this thing? This is a part of the question. How do we make it relevant? So, I think some pastors get a little overly cute on their titles sometimes, but there's nothing wrong with taking a title and making it something that is catchy or quippy or something that's easily remembered, or maybe is, very much in line with what's happening within culture, a television show or, a movie or whatever it is. Use the world around you. I went to a school called Taylor University before I moved to South Carolina, and Taylor's theme for the whole school was all truth is God's truth. Meaning if you find truth somewhere, whether it's in culture, movie, wherever it comes from, it was God's first. It wasn't theirs. And so
Right.
I feel the same way when it comes to this kind of thing. Like if you're going to come up with a good title for a series, like that's God's first. Be creative about it and come up with something that's going to really communicate. So what are we going to call it? Let's come up with a title. And then after that, you can ask, what are we going to call each week then? So again, our sermon series is, what's one of your favorite series in a box we've just done?
I think the was it wise as serpents, gentle as doves, which hasn't released yet, but it's
not really. Yeah, it's a little tease though for y'all.
Yeah.
It looks awesome.
It looks
awesome.
great. Yeah.
But again, that is a great title series for a 4-week series. The question might be, well, how do we break that down? The idea behind that series is, as Christians, we don't want to win arguments. We want to be winsome in our arguments. We want to be winsome in the way that we live in the world. So what scriptures speak to that idea? It's very much a felt need in our culture today that is so polarized and so full of division. So how do we be, wise as serpents and gentle as doves? So that's a great title for the whole series. What does each week look like then? What scripture and then what title will we give to that? Because once you have those things, you can create your write-up then for each one of those things. What's our write-up for the whole series? What's our write-up for week 1, 2, 3, and 4?
How do we make sure that we're not being cool for cool or quippy just to be quippy, but that you're grounded in teaching God's word?
I don't know that there is a foolproof way to keep yourself from that. But I would say being a part of a team certainly helps with that. If I'm in a room by myself, I can come up with something that I think is so funny and so clever. And then I bring it to the congregation. They're like, this is so dumb. Like, this isn't helpful. Or this is offensive, actually, that you've come up with this kind of idea. But if I have a team of people around me that we're wrestling with this, whether they're laity or their staff, I can ask the question, is this on target? Like, does this make sense? Does this resonate with you? And then that helps you then make sure you avoid some of those pitfalls.
Okay, so last question for you before I hit you with rapid fire.
Yeah.
What about follow-up and evaluation? Now that it's done, how do I?
So in our weekly meetings on Tuesday, before we go into the next Sunday and the Sunday after, we always take about 20 minutes to evaluate the Sunday before. And so it takes some thick skin as a communicator to be able to hear someone say, you were so close, but I feel like you kind of missed it here. This story didn't really hit maybe the way that it could have or whatever. We're never doing it as a gotcha moment. We're always doing it as an improvement moment. And so we want to evaluate and say what went really well.
How does that help me though? Like, how does it help me in the future? I mean, if I receive that, there's a piece of me that's like, well, why didn't you tell me that in the planning meeting? Right. I could have crafted my story differently.
Yes.
Like, how do we not play Monday morning quarterback?
So 3 things. Number 1, the clearer you are on the weeks before you preach, then the more input the group can give. Does that make sense? If I come in and I'm like, I think I'm going to use the story sort of like this, that's not helpful because then we can't give that kind of feedback. But if I'm saying, here's the story I'm going to use, then we might be able to say, oh, that's a great story, but have you thought about this one? I think this one actually speaks to it a little bit better. So again, the more you're planned, then the more, targeted you can be. But we actually, because we have 2 services, we actually do give each other feedback after the 9:00 service before the 10:45. And so there've been many times where someone will come and say, hey, I thought that was really funny, but I felt like you had the punchline a little bit too fast. Like maybe let it sit a little bit longer. Or they might say, hey, at the end, I feel like people were really wanting to respond a little bit more. Consider maybe having them, do something to respond. Then I can adjust that for 10:45. But also the feedback on Tuesday, even if I'm not preaching that message again, I still may hear someone say to me, like, the greatest critique that I've had my entire life of preaching is you talk too fast. And to it, which everyone watching this podcast, like, no kidding. But I've had to really work on that on stage. And so if I had that feedback on Tuesday, hey, listen, great message, that it was a little fast for me, then I might be able to say, okay, that's something I need to take in mind and work on as my craft to get better and better. It's not just a tweak, but it's an actual change that I can take and apply to my communication to become a better pastor as I go. So
good.
But don't be afraid of evaluation. Like, we got to embrace evaluation.
Yeah, because it makes us better. And I agree. All right, rapid fire. You ready?
Yeah.
All right, here we go. Number 1, what is one thing that makes a sermon super powerful that people walk away being the most impacted?
I would say paying attention to every way that people learn things. So in your sermon, you need to have something that is visual, something that is auditory, something that they're experiencing. So use every aspect of learning, because not everybody learns from seeing something up on the screen like a PowerPoint. Like that's just not going to speak to everybody. And not everybody's going to, resonate with your story that you tell and you get tears in your eyes and they start bawling. Like not everybody's going to feel that. And so I try as hard as I can within every sermon that I do to have something visual, something experiential, something that is, people are experiencing through all their different senses, because everybody learns in a different manner. So that's how you make it powerful.
Number 2, who would you trade places with for a day?
Alive or dead?
Doesn't matter. You can pick.
I guess I don't want to trade my places that are dead, but
yeah.
Alive. Oh my gosh.
When they were alive, I guess.
Exactly. That's the point I was trying to get at.
Yeah, that's fine.
Gosh, who would I trade places with? So I'm an old high school college football player. So pretty much anybody in the NFL, I don't care who it is, I would trade places for a day just to experience that and take home the paycheck it needs to be a Sunday, but
right. Just on payday, it will.
Just on payday.
All right. What superpower would you like to have?
I feel like when I choose one, I heard all the others' feelings, but
right.
Superpowers
have feelings that are going to be hurt by whatever you say. So listen, be sure to filter this.
I want to say fly, but I'm not going to choose that one. It's going to hurt that feeling. I would love to be able to breathe underwater. Like that would just be incredible. To like swim underwater and I have to come up for air, see all the stuff. Like that's what I would choose probably.
Good. All right. You have young kids. What children's show theme song can you not get out of your head?
Are you familiar with Blippi?
I am not. I think I'm out of it now, but
Blippi, so much to learn about. No. So there are people that are watching right now that are like, I can't believe you just did that to me, because it's on repeat in my house. My 2-year-old daughter loves Blippi.
All right. Last question. What is something really encouraging that you're seeing in the church right now?
I think I'm seeing people in the church. I can only speak to my congregation, my kind of community, but I'm seeing people stepping away from kind of the partisan politic corner that we get pushed into oftentimes, and really embracing the idea that as Christians, we are third way. We're something different altogether. And to me, that's incredibly encouraging, because I think sometimes there are arguments and divisions and distractions that come about that we don't have to have if we were to be able to kind of live outside of those kinds of petty things that we oftentimes get involved in. Now, I want to be clear. I think few things are very important. I think our political leanings are convictions that we should hold. But right. The more we can learn to hold compassion and conviction in the same hand, then I think the church can continue to make an impact.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. How can we stand firm on what the Bible is calling us to do, what God is calling us to do, but also not have to step into the division? I think you hit on it.
I think it's an important thing to do. Like, the first thing I would say is every pastor, every person working in the church has to do the hard work of really coming to their convictions on their own. Meaning, we don't have the luxury to just have a position and not have a reason for our position anymore. Like, that doesn't exist anymore. So like, we really need to wrestle with stuff to be able to have intelligent conversations with people, and to be able to really wrestle with stuff and not see people as enemy, but instead see people as people. And to me, the way that I've done it the best is being really informed on the topics I'm having conversation about, not just something that I've read on, 40 characters on Instagram or Twitter.
Right. And maybe be willing to say, I'm not read up on that enough.
Right.
Let me
look into that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Have some humility there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the things that I have done the hard work on and I've wrestled with in terms of scripture or things that are within the world, then be willing to have those conversations, because it's incredibly important in our world today.
Good. Well, man, I love you, buddy. You're one of my best friends, and I really appreciate everything, not only that you do for 1230 in our community, but just as a friend. And, man, just grateful for the time today. Thank you so much.
Sure. Carl, what you are doing, man, is such an impact in the church. It's making a huge, huge difference. We get the opportunity to see it kind of each and every week, but what is taking place through 1230 is nothing short of amazing, and I feel honored to be a part of it. So thank you.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Hey guys, I want to let you know about our brand new KidMin Tribe podcast. With our new 1230 Kids brand, we are providing ready-made media, custom media, and training resources for your kids, pastors, and leaders. And this new kids podcast falls right into that training arm. It's hosted by veteran KidMin leader Jason Noble. Jason has served in kids ministry for a long time. He served as the head for the Assemblies of God denomination headquarters over all of kids ministry there. He's also the real-life pastor from the movie Breakthrough, if you saw that movie. Jason is an incredible guy. He has some fantastic guests lined up. He's coming out of the gate very strong with guests like Yancey, Jim Weidman, the Seeds Family Worship Team, Dave Ray from Doorpost Songs, Brian Dollar from High Voltage Kids, and more. The podcast will be released every 2 weeks, so we'll do a KidMin blog post 1 week and release a kids podcast the other week. And all that is free weekly training for kids, pastors, and leaders. Be sure to subscribe and check out the new podcast at KidMinTribe.com. That's KidMinTribe.com.
The show notes for this episode are available now at MakingSundayHappen.com.
Well, hey guys, thanks so much for being here this week. If you would, share this episode of the podcast with others, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel if you would. We give this podcast out for free. We give a lot of our training content. We have a weekly blog, weekly podcast. All of it's free, and we're looking into doing more training content as well. We love serving churches, so this is one area that we try to give as much away as we possibly can. So it really helps if you were to share and like and rate and review the podcast if you would. It allows the podcast to go up in the rankings and to get to more people, and that in turn helps us get some sponsorships and other funds to come in to fund the production of the podcast. So thank you so much. We have seen an influx the last few weeks. We've been doing this for almost 7 years now. This is episode number 366 of the podcast. So we are not slowing down at all. It's been an incredible journey. We have some great guests lined up coming up in the next few weeks and into the fall and spring of next year. So we are just getting started. So thank you so much for being a faithful listener to the podcast. We would so love it if you would share it with your Facebook group, share it with your friends. That would be a huge help. We'll go out there and create some amazing worship experiences this weekend. We're behind you. We're cheering you on. You can do it. I'll catch you next week.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit MakingSundayHappen.com.